If you can tell this isn't real, your eyes are better than mine. Most photorealistic models exaggerate details, you get waxy skin, blurry backgrounds, but this nails the imperfect perfection of real life. From street shots to stock images, it's realism on demand. If you happen to be new to OpenArt, you can start creating images by going up to the top and selecting Create Image. And for those of you who are current users, you'll notice the UI is slightly different. However, the main functionality is still the same. So there's an extra panel here, and you can just collapse that when you're not using it. And then you can access OpenArt Photorealistic here. And then you'll see the OpenArt Photorealistic model here. Let's select that. And now you see we have our model selected. Now, while I show you some examples on the screen, some of the highlights are true to life lighting, textures and detail, photo quality images from simple prompts. You don't need a novel. It's a versatile model in terms of realism for things like stock photography, marketing images, mockups, and storytelling. While models like FluxDev and even Flux Context in some scenarios tend to have that plastic hyper-realistic look, this image model isn't like that. The output of the image looks a lot like camera phone selfies or a mirrorless camera using flash with realistic skin texture. It has less of a tendency to have clef chins, blurry backgrounds, or exaggerated details. You also don't necessarily have to prompt for analog, cinematic, just the subject, action, environment, maybe the lighting, and the details of their clothing or accessories. I'm going to show you a few side-by-side examples between FluxDev, Flux Context Pro, and OpenArt Photorealistic. And as you can see in this example, while they all look great, both FluxDev and Context Pro tend to lean towards that cinematic look. And sometimes the details are a little over-exaggerated, where if you look at Flux Context, all the ingredients here are kind of all over the place. We have the typical FluxDev blurry background. Now, mind you, there's quite a bit of space from the subject to the background, so that's to be expected. Where we see OpenArt Photorealistic here, you'll notice the lighting, as I said, is similar to like taking a photo with a flash or a camera phone. The background details are very clear. Mind you, again, the depth of field isn't as deep as FluxDev, for example. But the coherency, the way he's holding the spoon, tasting the sauce, it's a very coherent image. Now here's a full screen image of just using OpenArt Photorealistic. Even the hands and fingers are generated very well, and it just looks very believable. In this example, all three of these images look great in terms of the details and coherency. But once again, you see FluxDev tends to lean towards that cinematic feel where it's almost a matte, washed out look. And Flux Context here actually looks pretty decent, and the text is legible. And with OpenArt Photorealistic here, in terms of the details from the dog to the police officer. And if you notice, the background details are very clear. If you're into photography, there's something called depth of field. And generally, when you have a shallow depth of field, you get this effect where it's blurry. But you notice with OpenArt Photorealistic, it's got a wider or deeper depth of field. So we can actually see the trees in the background there. You'll also notice with this image, the harsh lighting on her cheek, and that's consistent on the dog here as well. But we do see that the text here isn't legible. That's probably one of the obvious downsides. Now the model can do text, you just have to specify it in the prompt. I didn't do that this time, but I will tell you it's not one of its strengths. Once again, you're going to see that running cinematic theme with the Flux models. You notice how FluxDev has that blurry background. That has a lot to do with how the model was trained and what was in the data set. Whereas with the OpenArt model, you see the details are pretty clear in the background. And Flux Context Pro here has a very muted tone as well. Once again, I do want to point out the accuracy of the hands and the fingers. It's probably some of the best hands and fingers I've seen on any of the latest models. In this comparison, I wanted to try some creative attire, and all models perform very well here, but you really do see that hyper-realistic plastic skin look on Context Pro here, which actually does that a little better than FlexDev, depending on the scenario and your prompt. And I actually find FlexDev here that it could be the lighting, where it's not as noticeable. And then with OpenArt's model, it looks very natural. The hands are coherent, they're not a mess, but you don't see that plastic shiny face look on this example. And of course, closer up, you can see more of those details. Now, in all fairness, with all models, when you have a close-up head and shoulder shot like this, typically you're going to get a lot of intricate details, can really see the skin texture in the eyes. With that being said, the realism is very evident. Generating vehicles isn't an issue with this model. Of course, it has its own style. If you look at the styles between FlexDev, OpenArt, and Flex Context Pro, they all have their own unique look. In these particular examples, though, I kind of dig the Flex models here a bit better than OpenArt's in this case. This was a prompt inspired by Aerith from Final Fantasy VII. And I selected this one just because her staff looked really cool, even though she's looking away. But again, it has that camera phone look. It looks so realistic, very believable, whereas the other two are more like cinematic CGI shots. I wanted to show you this example for a reason, because certain prompts you're using with FlexDev, Flex Context Pro, or whatever other model, they may not work the same way with this model. You may have to rearrange the prompts or use different words to get similar styles. So just be aware you may have to redo some of your prompts. I was actually quite surprised here that Flex Context Pro, the skin on Superman here looks very, very plasticky, probably a little bit more than FlexDev here. In any case, if we look at OpenArt Photorealistic, once again, very realistic, very believable. You could even see the blemishes, the little imperfections that make it look realistic. The one thing you will find, though, if you're not prompting for specific lighting, it tends to default to this bright, harsh lighting, and the model is just interpreting the environment. But instead of prompting for things like soft lighting, diffuse lighting, it responds better to environmental prompts. So identifying time of day, sunset, overcast, blue skies, or if it's indoor, you want to state neon lights, studio lighting, whatever the case may be, that seems to work a lot better. Now, although this model is very versatile in terms of realism, it's not an all-purpose model like Flex Context that can do many styles from anime to abstract and all. That's not what this model is. But if you want realistic images of people mainly, OpenArt Photorealistic may be the model for you. Coming very soon, I'm going to start a series on all the various models on OpenArt. Stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, if you haven't heard of our feature, OpenArt Story, make sure to check it out right here. As always, my friends, let me know in the comments below what you think about OpenArt Photorealistic. Until that next video, happy creating.